Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we take these really dense, complex topics and, well, we break them down. We pull out the core ideas, the things you can actually use to get an edge.
And today, we're tackling something pretty intense, a really provocative text about conflict.
Yeah, we're going way beyond just military history here. The source is Robert Greene's massive work, The 33 Strategies of War.
But our goal isn't about, glorifying war or anything like that. It's about digging into the psychology of conflict itself, the stuff that applies everywhere, business deals, managing teams, even just navigating social situations.
Right, because when you hear strategies of war, I think the first reaction for a lot of people is, whoa, no thanks, that's not for civilized society.
Exactly. And the book argues that thinking that way is actually, well, it's kind of dangerous. It's a form of self-deception.
How so?
Well, maybe we don't have big organized wars between states like we used to, or not as often, but the basic struggle for power, for resources, for recognition, that never stops.
It just goes underground.
Pretty much. And if you don't understand strategy, you're basically choosing to be defenseless against the people who do use it. The wolves, as Greene calls them, they just use subtle methods, sometimes even masking aggression as like friendship.
Oof. Yeah, if you can't spot the move, you can't defend against it.
Exactly. So understanding strategy, it becomes a form of self-defense, really. Recognizing that conflict hasn't vanished, it's just become subtle.
And the book insists this all starts internally, doesn't it? You have to win the inner war first. This idea of being, supremely rational and emotionally balanced.
That's the core of it. War just reflects human nature, the good and the bad. If your own fear or ego or impatience is running the show, you've already lost before you even start. That rationality is the ideal, yeah, but getting there takes real work.
Okay, but that sounds like a bit of paradox, right? If I'm in a crisis, my emotions are probably going haywire. How am I supposed to just become supremely rational right then?
It's definitely a challenge. It's not flipping a switch. It's about building resilience before the crisis hits and having techniques ready.
All right, let's get into it. We've kind of mapped this out into 4 main areas. First, that inner mastery piece, getting your head right and figuring out who you're actually up against.
Then we'll look at the organizational side, how you structure things and motivate people.
Third, finding that unconventional edge, using things like mobility.
And finally, the really deep stuff, psychological warfare, deception, and how you actually finish a conflict strategically. Okay, so that inner battlefield. This is where most failures happen, honestly, not because people aren't smart or talented, but because they lose their cool.
We get comfortable, right? Our daily routines make us feel like we're in control, everything's rational. The stakes are usually pretty low day to day.
Exactly. But then something big happens. A betrayal at work, a market crash, a personal crisis.
And suddenly that rational thinking just evaporates. Fear takes over, or anger, confusion, you're just reacting.
And fear is the absolute worst for clear thinking because it just fuels your imagination, doesn't it? You start picturing every possible disaster, things that haven't even happened.
So how do you fight that? The book gives a couple of interesting approaches.
Yeah, 2 ways to deal with that internal chaos. They seem different, but they work. First up is mastering emotion, and the example used is General Patton.
Ah, Patton. Okay. His approach wasn't about hiding fear, was it?
Not at all. It was aggressive. He was terrified of one thing, being seen as a coward, basically. So what did he do?
He sought out danger.
Deliberately. He put himself in situations that scared him, to get used to the physical feeling of fear, to practice overcoming it. He was literally battle testing his own mind.
Turning his biggest fear into, fuel for resolve. Wow.
It's a very muscular way to condition yourself emotionally.
Yeah.
Intensified confidence, double the resolve, as the book says.
What's the other way? Sounds less intense.
Much more subtle. It's the example of the Japanese tea master. Yeah. Faced with a hostile samurai, he was understandably terrified. But he didn't fight. He didn't run. He forced himself to focus entirely on the tea ceremony, every precise movement, every detail.
Ah, so it's about distraction, or focus, rather.
Exactly. It's a powerful trick. When you're scared, don't wrestle the fear directly. Divert your mental energy. Force your brain onto something simple, something repetitive that you know inside out.
Like a ritual.
Yeah. A focused mind literally doesn't have room for the anxiety spiral. Once you regain that mental balance, the panic fades, and you can think clearly again about the actual problem.
So Patton confronts fear head-on, familiarizes himself with it. The tea master uses focused diversion until the storm passes. Different paths, same goal.
Yeah.
Get back to rational.
Precisely. And once you are back in that state, the advice is crucial. Don't freeze up with caution. You were careful during planning. Now it's time to commit. Double down on resolve, clear your head of doubts, and almost find enjoyment in attacking the problem.
Momentum. It favors the bold, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that momentum takes us from inside our heads to the outside world, which brings us to the next big idea, the polarity strategy, declaring war on your enemies. But if everything's subtle now, how do you even know who the enemy is?
That's the million-dollar question in modern conflict, isn't it? Enemies rarely announce themselves. They're political, indirect. They might even act like your friend or ally while undermining you.
The friend who knows exactly where to stick the knife?
Sadly, yes. So if you refuse to even internally acknowledge that you have enemies or might have them, you won't see the threat coming from your inner circle.
So how do you smoke them out?
You have to become a really keen observer. Watch for unconscious signals, look for patterns, changes in emotional temperature. The book uses the example of Mao Zedong and Lin Biao. It's fascinating.
Lin Biao was one of Mao's closest allies, right? Possibly his successor.
Exactly. And everyone was praising Mao, but Lin Biao's praise started getting weird, like embarrassingly fervent is the phrase used, over the top, unnatural.
Not criticism, but too much support.
Yeah, it was like the mask was too thick, too perfect. Mao picked up on that emotional shift, that unnatural quality, and correctly figured Lin Biao was plotting against him. The hostility was so deep, it needed this super sweet coating.
Wow. Okay, so the lesson for us is watch for those unnatural extremes, even positive ones. Changes in behavior.
Definitely. But why is it so important to actually identify and, name an enemy? Isn't peace always better? Strategically, having a clear enemy is incredibly useful. Gives you focus, purpose, direction. It's actually a huge source of energy.
Like athletes with major rivals.
Perfect example. Think Ali and Frazier. Frazier pushed Ali to be better than he ever thought he could be. A tough opponent forces you to raise your game. They become the standard you measure yourself against.
If you only fight easy battles, you get complacent. You atrophy.
Exactly. A strong enemy sharpens you. Even if you lose sometimes, you learn, you gain respect. It rallies your own side too. Gives everyone a clear objective.
Okay, so part one was getting your own head straight and identifying the real threats. But even the best ideas and sharpest insights don't mean much if your team, your organization, can't execute. That brings us to strategy 5. Unity of command and avoiding groupthink.
Right. Leading any group is this constant balancing act. You clamp down too hard, become too authoritarian, and what happens? People just resent you silently. They comply, but there's no spirit.
But if you're too easygoing, too consensus-driven,
You get drift. Selfishness creeps in. Or worse, groupthink, where everyone agrees just to keep the peace, even if the idea is terrible, that collective irrationality.
So the goal is alignment. Getting your key people to understand the spirit of what you want so they can act intelligently without being micromanaged.
Precisely. So it's setting up the structure and the culture. Look at General Marshall during World War II. He had this really indirect but super effective leadership style. Apparently, he'd make a fuss over tiny details like officers submitting gardening bills.
Gardening bills. Seriously.
Yeah. And you might think, what's the point? But the subtle message was, if I notice a dodgy gardening bill, imagine what else I notice. It created this background hum of accountability, focused everyone on efficiency, on the mission, not on Marshall himself.
That's clever. Indirect control. Contrast that with the opposite, divided command. The Gallipoli example from World War I is just brutal.
Oh, it's a classic strategic disaster. The Allies land thousands of troops. There's this key high ground, Teke Tepe, completely undefended. Taking it is crucial. Time is everything because Turkish reinforcements are on the way.
So, seize the hill, right? Obvious move.
Should have been. But the commander on the ground, General Stopford,
Yeah.
he just froze. He got obsessed with good order, with landing supplies neatly, consolidating his position.
While the Turks were racing towards the objective.
Exactly. He ignored urgent reports. He wouldn't even order a night march because it seemed too dangerous. He basically handed the enemy the one thing they needed, time to dig in.
And that caution, that rigidity, doomed the whole campaign. Led to horrendous casualties.
It really drives home Napoleon's point. Better one bad general than two good ones. Shared command, decision by committee. It's often a recipe for disaster. If someone offers you shared command, the advice is just say no. Exploit that weakness when you see it in an opponent.
This failure of rigidity ties perfectly into the next strategy, doesn't it? Strategy 6, controlled chaos. All about speed and adaptability.
Yes. And the core idea here is profound. Your organizational structure is your strategy. It's not just a box you put the strategy into.
Napoleon again. His real genius wasn't just battlefield tactics, it was how he organized his army.
Totally. His weapons weren't that different from his enemies, but his doctrine, specifically the core system, was revolutionary.
Explain the core system again. How did that create speed?
Okay, so each corps was like a mini army in itself. It had infantry, cavalry, artillery, engineers, its own staff, everything it needed to operate independently for a decent amount of time, maybe days, maybe a week or two.
So they could split up.
Yes, and move fast. The enemy might encounter one French corps and think they're facing the main army, but it was just a fraction, highly mobile. While the enemy command was centralized, waiting for orders to move a single unit.
Napoleon's corps could fan out, maneuver, concentrate rapidly, overwhelm the enemy's ability to even process what was happening.
It created options. It tolerated uncertainty, but that requires immense trust down the chain of command.
Like that German officer story. His Majesty made you a major because he believed you would know when not to obey his orders.
Exactly. You have to empower people to act on initiative, to understand the intent of the plan, not just follow orders blindly.
But what makes people want to operate like that? With that kind of dedication, taking risks, that brings us to motivation, like with the Cromwell model.
Right. Cromwell looked at the typical army of his day, mercenaries fighting for pay, and he thought, these guys are unreliable. Their loyalty is just transactional.
So he built a different kind of army.
He recruited commoners, the russet-coated men who were driven by intense religious faith. Their motivation wasn't the paycheck. It was fighting for God's cause, as they saw it.
He tapped into a deeper purpose.
A much deeper purpose. But crucially, he also took care of them, made sure they were fed, clothed, paid on time. He showed their lives and their cause were valued. It was faith plus welfare, creating this incredibly devoted, motivated force.
We see a similar, though maybe more secular version with Lyndon Johnson in politics, right? He built this legendarily devoted staff.
Yeah, Johnson's method was sheer intensity. He worked himself into the ground harder than anyone else.
And expected the same from his staff.
Absolutely. And they gave it to him. Not just for career reasons, but because they desperately wanted his approval.
Yeah.
And maybe even more powerfully, they felt guilty if they didn't match his insane work ethic. Like they were letting him down, being selfish.
She created this psychological environment where extreme work felt like the moral baseline. That's intense.
Incredibly effective, though, for building loyalty.
And Napoleon, maybe the master of this, seemed to use all the tricks.
Oh, absolutely. He rallied them around big causes of the revolution, French glory. He led from the front, sharing their risks. He appealed to their desire for recognition, not just money. Used punishment sparingly but effectively, but the real key.
Meritocracy.
Pure meritocracy. Promotions came from battlefield performance, period. Skill and bravery were rewarded directly. That created this powerful incentive. Be devoted, be effective, and you will rise. It pulled people into his orbit completely.
All right, let's shift gears from organizing your forces to applying pressure. High-pressure tactics, often about creating a psychological crisis, sometimes by putting yourself under immense pressure too, which leads us straight into fighting from the death ground.
The death ground. Sounds grim, but the psychology is fascinating. The idea is that our biggest internal enemy is often just complacency, thinking we have plenty of time.
Exactly, the illusion of limitless time. So you deliberately put yourself in a situation where losing is simply not an option, where retreat is impossible. That forces intense focus. It wipes out complacency. It creates this absolute necessity to succeed, like Hernan Cortez in Mexico.
Classic example. Some of his men wanted to turn back, abandon the whole risky conquest. What did Cortez do?
He burned the ships, or scuttled them anyway.
Right. He didn't just give a speech. He physically removed the possibility of retreat. No turning back, literally. The only way home was through conquering the Aztecs. That utter desperation fueled an unbelievable campaign against overwhelming odds.
Wow. And then there's Dostoevsky, the writer, a very different context.
Totally different, but the same principle. He went through a mock execution as a young man, stared death in the face. And it changed him. He vowed never to waste another second.
So writing became his death ground.
In a way, yes. He wrote with this incredible urgency as if his life depended on it. And later, if he felt himself getting lazy or blocked, he deliberately create a crisis, go to the casino and gamble away all his money.
Seriously, to force himself to write.
Yep. He called it inducing a symbolic death. Poverty, debt. It recreated that feeling of desperation, that edge he needed to produce his best work, turning the fear of ruin into a creative tool.
That's extreme, but powerful.
Okay.
How does this apply on an actual battlefield?
Think of the Chinese general Han Xin, mentioned in The Art of War. He had these raw recruits, basically untrained guys from the marketplace.
Not exactly elite soldiers.
Far from it. And where'd he position them? With their backs right up against a river. A terrible spot, tactically. Nowhere to run.
His own officers must have thought he was crazy.
They did. But Han Xin explained the principle. Put them in a hopeless spot and they will survive. If he'd given them an easy escape route, they would have bolted at the first sign of trouble. By removing the option of flight, he forced them to fight like cornered animals, turned weakness into unexpected strength.
Okay, so you create urgency, even desperation. But you also need to control where the fight happens, right?
Yeah.
You can't let the opponent dictate the terms. This sounds like shifting the battlefield and compelling mistakes.
Exactly. You can't beat an expert on their home turf, playing by their rules. You have to drag the conflict onto ground where you have the advantage, where their strengths become irrelevant. The Mae West example is brilliant here.
The actress. How did she shift a battlefield?
When she arrived in Hollywood, the studio bosses just saw her as, another disposable blonde bombshell, someone they could easily manage and control.
So if she argued about her acting roles, she'd be playing their game.
Right. That was their territory casting, performance. So she did something completely unexpected. She gave back her hefty advance payment.
Returned the money. Why?
It was a power move. It completely threw them. It shifted the conversation from, is Mae West being difficult, to, wait, why would she return the money? Maybe the script is the problem. She made them doubt their product, not her attitude.
And that gave her leverage.
Huge leverage. It allowed her to demand control over her own dialogue. Then she started fighting about directing choices, blocking, lighting, angles. She subtly moved the battleground from acting, where they felt powerful, to writing and directing, where she was the expert and they were suddenly unsure. She won by changing the rules of engagement. This all ties back to mobility, doesn't it? Yeah. Value movement, flexibility, open space over clinging to fixed positions or possessions.
Commitments become chains. You need room to maneuver. Open space, not dead positions, as the book puts it.
And when you combine that mobility with sharp, sudden action, that's the blitzkrieg in daily life. You hit your opponent unexpectedly, decisively, force them to react before they're ready.
Throw them on balance psychologically.
Precisely. Make them confused, make them rush, make them make mistakes. Your victory often comes not just from your own brilliance, but from the errors you force them into. You create a situation where they can't use their usual strengths, and they just spiral into paralysis.
Okay, now we're getting into the really advanced stuff. Pure psychological strategy. Starting with hitting the center of gravity, the cog.
Right. This isn't about winning every little skirmish. It's about finding that single crucial point, the source of the enemy's power, or their biggest vulnerability, and hitting that. Neutralize the cog, and the whole structure can just collapse.
So you have to look beyond the obvious battlefield. Look at their support systems.
Exactly. Financial, political, morale. General Giap in Vietnam is the absolute masterclass for this in modern times. He figured out the American cog wasn't its army in the field.
It was public opinion back home.
Political support.
Precisely. He knew the U.S. couldn't sustain the war indefinitely without popular support. So the Tet Offensive in 1968. Militarily, it was a disaster for the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army. Huge losses.
But strategically,
a massive political victory for Giap. It shocked the American public. It created the perception, true or not, that the war was unwinnable. It destroyed the political will to continue, even though the U.S. military was winning tactically. He hit the cog. That's powerful. Another example is Queen Elizabeth I against Spain, right? She didn't try to take on the Spanish Armada head-on initially.
No, she was much smarter. She recognized Philip II's vast empire ran on one thing: gold and silver shipped from the New World. That treasure fleet was Spain's cog. And it was vulnerable.
Vulnerable to pirates, privateers like Sir Francis Drake.
Exactly, but it wasn't just about stealing the gold. It was about interrupting the flow. Spain's military campaigns were financed on credit, based on the expectation of that gold arriving.
So delaying the ships messed up their finances.
Critically, Elizabeth secretly backed Drake and others to harass the Spanish shipping. Even just delaying the arrival of the treasure fleet could cause Philip's Italian bankers to call in loans. It subtly undermined Spain's ability to fund its wars, weakening the empire from within, without England needing to risk a huge, decisive battle at first. Genius.
Okay, related to finding weaknesses.
Yeah.
Genghis Khan's approach. Divide and isolate.
Yeah, Khan used the incredible mobility of his Mongol horsemen not just to attack, but to cut enemy communication lines, cut off supply routes, isolate different parts of the enemy army from each other.
Making them feel cut off, alone.
Yes. That isolation creates this deep, primitive fear, feeling abandoned, unsupported. It breaks morale far faster than just killing soldiers. Khan's small, fast movements could trigger a psychological collapse across a much larger, slower enemy force. Okay, so you find the weakness. Sometimes, though, the best strategy is deception, which brings us to the art of the false mirror in deterrence.
This is about controlling perceptions. Sometimes deterrence isn't about looking strong, it's about looking weak or harmless.
Strange as it sounds, yes. Playing the lamb can be incredibly effective. Think of Claudius in ancient Rome. He survived the bloody reigns of emperors like Tiberius and Caligula, who killed off most potential rivals, largely because everyone thought he was sickly, foolish, harmless, an unassuming threat.
So they just ignored him until he became emperor himself.
Exactly. Or, more recently, Major John Boyd in the Pentagon, the fighter pilot theorist. He was pushing for a radical new lightweight fighter jet, facing huge bureaucratic resistance.
How did he handle it?
He deliberately cultivated this image of being, well, a bit rough around the edges. Shabby suits, chomping a cigar, looking kind of wild-eyed. People underestimated him, thought he was maybe a bit dumb.
Why, he was brilliantly maneuvering behind the scenes.
Buying himself time and space to work his strategy without alerting the big bureaucratic guns too early. Strategic camouflage.
So that's feigning weakness. But the ultimate deception is the false mirror, right? Like Operation Fortitude before D-Day.
Oh, that's the Mona Lisa of strategic deception. The Allies absolutely had to convince Hitler the main invasion was coming at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the channel, not Normandy.
And Hitler already kind of believed that, didn't he?
He did. That was the key. British intelligence knew Hitler was paranoid, and his own logic told him Calais was the obvious spot. So the Allies didn't just invent a story out of thin air. They built a deception that confirmed Hitler's existing bias.
The Ghost Army. FUSI.
The fictional First U.S. Army Group, supposedly commanded by Patton, who Hitler respected and feared. They created fake radio traffic, inflatable tanks, used double agents feeding misinformation. A whole illusion.
But they mixed in real elements too.
Crucially, yes. They blended the fake stuff with just enough visible, verifiable truth to make the whole picture seem plausible. The false mirror reflected back what Hitler wanted to see, amplified his own flawed reasoning.
And he bought it completely. Kept his best panzer divisions waiting for the real invasion at Calais, even after the Normandy landing started, paralyzed by his own conviction.
His imagination did most of the work for the Allies. It's a perfect example of psychological manipulation on a massive scale. And it connects back to spotting those hidden signals like we talked about with Mao. Remember King Saul?
And his son Jonathan covering for David.
Yeah. Jonathan didn't believe his father truly wanted to kill David. But then, at dinner, when David was absent, Saul exploded at Jonathan with this volcanic rage. That extreme, disproportionate anger was the signal. It instantly revealed the depth of Saul's murderous intent, a truth Jonathan had refused to see until that moment. You have to read the subtext.
Okay, so we've covered direct attacks, deception. What about influencing people more subtly, getting them to adopt your ideas without realizing it? Visceral communication and indirect influence.
Right. The goal isn't to argue someone into submission. It's to make them feel like they came up with the idea. Psychological internalization. Alfred Hitchcock was apparently amazing at this with actors.
Hitchcock, how?
He rarely gave direct, explicit instructions, which drove some actors crazy. Instead, he'd use atmosphere, long silences, weird jokes, sometimes bizarre physical stuff, like literally jumping on an actress and yelling, "Relax."
What was the point of that?
It was visceral. It broke down their defenses, their preconceived notions. It forced them to feel the emotion or the state he wanted, rather than just intellectually trying to perform it based on his direction. He communicated the feeling indirectly.
And Machiavelli did this in his writing.
Absolutely. He knew powerful rulers hate being told what to do directly. And readers might be scared off by his more ruthless advice. So he used clever tricks. They pack his books with practical tips, entertaining stories from history to lower the reader's guard. And then, crucially, he'd subtly tweak quotes from respected classical authors.
How would you tweak them?
Okay, say a classic writer argued a prince should be merciful because it's morally right. Machiavelli might quote that, but shift the context slightly, implying the real reason to appear merciful is purely strategic. It enhances the prince's security and power in the long run.
Ah, so he slips the amoral calculation in under the radar.
Exactly. The reader connects the dots themselves, feels like they've uncovered this hidden practical truth. And because they feel they discovered it, the idea takes much deeper root than if Machiavelli had just stated it bluntly.
It's like Socrates and his questioning method, the midwifery idea. Help people give birth to the idea themselves.
Precisely. Lead them to the conclusion, don't force it on them. Much more effective long term.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground. Let's talk about wrapping things up. The strategic end game and exit strategy. Because winning battles is pointless if you mess up the ending.
So true. And often overlooked because of pride or wishful thinking. The number one rule here is negotiate while advancing. The diplomatic war strategy.
Meaning, never stop your attack just because the enemy says they want to talk.
Never. It's almost always a trap, or at least a way for them to buy time. It gives them a chance to regroup, reinforce, recover while you're sitting still at the negotiating table.
The Korean War example is chilling.
Textbook tragedy. In 1951, the UN forces, mainly US, were pushing north successfully. The Chinese hinted they were ready for ceasefire talks. The US halted its offensive to negotiate.
And the Chinese used the talks to stall.
For months. While they rebuilt their forces and dug in massively, when the fighting inevitably resumed, the UN forces faced much stronger defenses, the momentum was lost, and the war dragged on for 2 more bloody years with huge casualties. You have to keep applying pressure to force negotiation on your terms.
And the flip side is knowing when to cut your losses, even if it hurts your pride. The Soviet war in Afghanistan.
A perfect example of the tragedy of a slow, painful ending. The Soviet leadership knew relatively early on it was a quagmire, but they stayed for years. Primarily out of fear of losing face, damaging their superpower image.
And the cost.
Immense. Not just the soldiers' loss, but the drain on their economy, the erosion of public trust back home. It significantly contributed to the weakening and eventual collapse of the Soviet Union itself. Sometimes the wisest move is the quickest, cleanest exit, even if it feels like a defeat at the time.
So before you even start anything, you need a clear exit strategy.
Absolutely. Your plan for ending the conflict is vague, just we'll figure it out later. You're not strategizing, you're gambling. The choice is often stark. Either commit to a swift, decisive blow to win cleanly, or cut your losses immediately. No dithering in the middle.
And we need to get away from thinking in simple win-loss terms, maintain a fluid perspective.
Yes, because nothing ever truly ends. Every outcome is just a transition to the next situation.
So you have to think about the aftermath. How does this ending set up the next stage?
Exactly. Some defeats can actually be good for you, a wake-up call, forces you to adapt. And some victories can be disastrous if you burn every bridge and alienate everyone in the process.
Which leads to that final, really crucial question.
What feeling are you leaving people with? As this conflict ends, what's the psychological state you're creating for the next interaction? Are you tuning enemies into potential allies? Are you setting yourself up for future success? What's the next move you're already maneuvering for?
Wow. So at the end of the day, it really comes back to applied psychology, doesn't it? Whether it's managing your own emotions, structuring a team, using deception, or planning an exit, it's all about understanding and influencing how people think and feel.
That's the common thread. Psychological awareness, fluidity, always thinking a step ahead, not just about the current battle, but about the transition that comes after. Like the book says, nothing ever really ends. Everything else is a transition.
A powerful thought to leave things on. Think about the feeling you create.
What outcome are you maneuvering for in that transition? Always be thinking about the next phase.
All right, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Go forth and try to be supremely rational, or at least strategically aware.
And we'll catch you on the next one.